Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to WAF for Distance Education and NBV3E. Yesterday, we started working through key question 7, and we did have time to do complete support question number 1, and hopefully you were able to work through that yourself. And today we're going to dig in a little deeper. I have some supplemental material here that by all rights should have been in this course, but it may not have been edited. This course might not have been edited in a while. But we're going to do that because what I'm going to discuss with you are some very important happenings that have taken place in the last couple of years. All right. Okay, so we did look at examples of ways to challenge and dispel racism and discrimination, artistic expression, and anti racism organizations. And we did touch basically on educational institutions. And so this is the weak part of this course right here because we are going to dig into it a little deeper here today. And to start off with, we are going to discuss a program um, that has started in Canada. It's not actually a program, it's a commission that was created by the federal government. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. And so we got a lot out of this. And one big thing that came out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada was the need to improve our education system and address the schools, that the Indigenous kids had to go to, that we discussed earlier. Um, but let's just start at the beginning here. The first thing I wanted to do is to introduce to you a fellow named Senator Murray Sinclair. So he was a senator in the Canadian government, right? They're right at the top of the hierarchy there. This is a mini documentary where he explains truth and reconciliation. Well, actually, he's explaining reconciliation, but we'll understand truth when we have a look at reconciliation. Okay, Murray's a lawyer, right? Well-respected lawyer. And I don't know if he just passed away recently or not. I can't remember. I will look that up for you. Okay. What's this video say here? Oh, yes, he's passed away. Okay, that was 3 weeks ago, just recently. But he did great things for our country. And this starts right here on reconciliation and Murray Sinclair.
Hello, everybody. I'm Murray Sinclair. I'm the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. I want to talk to you for a few minutes about the issue of reconciliation, something which, of course, is very important to us here at the Commission, but also is of interest and importance to a lot of people in Canada. One of the things that we at the Commission have discovered is that it took us a long time to get to this point in terms of the relationship between Aboriginal people in this country. 7 generations of children went through the residential schools. And each of those children who were educated were told that their lives were not as good as the lives of the non-Aboriginal people of this country. They were told that their languages, their cultures were irrelevant. They were told that their people and their ancestors were heathens and pagans and uncivilized and needed to give up that way of life to come to a different way of living. At the same time that that was going on, non-Aboriginal children in the non-Aboriginal school systems of this country were also being told the same thing about Aboriginal people. So as a result, many generations of children, including you and your parents, have been raised to think about things in a different way, in the wrong way, in a way that is negative when it comes to Aboriginal people. And we need to change that. It was the educational system that has contributed to this problem in this country, and it's the educational system we believe that's going to help us to get away from this. We need to look at the way that we educate children. We need to look at the way that we educate ourselves. We need to look at what it is that our textbooks say about Aboriginal people. We need to look at what it is that Aboriginal people themselves are allowed to say within the educational system about their own histories. In addition to that, we also believe that what's important when it comes to looking at the way that children are educated is to understand that because it took us so many generations to get to this point, it's going to take us at least a few generations to be able to say that we are making progress. We cannot look for quick and easy solutions because there are none. We need to be able to look at this from the perspective of where do we want to be in 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 generations from now when we talk about the relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in this country. And if we can agree on what that relationship needs to look like in the future, then what we need to think about is what can we do today that will contribute to that objective. Reconciliation will be about ensuring that everything that we do today is aimed at that high standard of restoring that balance to that relationship.
Okay, so that's or the late Murray Sinclair, explaining um, his role and the government's role in
Hello, everybody. I'm Murray Sinclair.
Truth and reconciliation. So, no, he was talking mostly about reconciliation. The truth component of this was when they interviewed the committee or the commission, interviewed countless people who had gone to through the residential school system, right? And they were able to determine the effects that that school system had on lots and lots of Aboriginal people in our country. Okay, so now let's look at a little deeper at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This is from their website, the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. I'm going to read through this article because I believe it's very important in this day and age. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada was created through a legal settlement between residential school survivors, the Assembly of First Nations, Inuit representatives, and the parties responsible for creation and operation of the schools, which are the federal government and church bodies. Now we're going to use the acronym here just to so we don't have to say the full title each time. TRC. The TRC's mandate was to inform all Canadians about what happened in residential schools. The TRC documented the truth of survivors, their families, communities, and anyone personally affected by the residential school experience. This included First Nations, Inuit, and Métis former residential school students, their families, communities, the churches, former school employees, government officials, and other Canadians. The TRC concluded its mandate in 2015 and transferred its records to the safekeeping of the National Truth and Reconciliation, the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, and CTR. The work of the TRC. The TRC carried out extensive research, including hearing from residential survivors, their families, members of their communities, former staff of residential schools, and others. Now, this section right here, which we aren't going to be getting into, is the uh, 94 calls for action. Now, I could go to that page, but we can't go through all of those. And these are very important, these 94 calls to action, because what we're going to be talking about in a bit is how some of these calls to action have been addressed as far as the education system goes, anyways. The TRC also hosted national events in different regions across Canada to promote awareness and public education about the residential school system and its impacts. The NCTR was also established as part of the TRC mandate as a permanent resource for all Canadians. And someone who had a big part in that locally was Garnet Angicanam. Now, I'll play a little video about Garnet later on near the end of the class, and we have lost him as well. Just this summer, he has passed away, but he was very important in our area on working with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. Actually, I forget how many years ago I went to one of the first meetings. It was at one of the hotels um, down Sturgeon Road there. What was the first one hotel called there? The one that used to have a pool? Can't remember, but they were speaking there. And Garnet was there. He was he was a committee chair in the area, and they were getting. Oh, that's when I first met my friend um, Ralph Johnson. He was speaking there, and I thought, wow, he's such a great speaker. You know, I asked him to be in a movie of mine because I was just so fascinated by the way that he spoke. Anyways, let's go on and read a little bit about this and finish off this section. Okay, so the 94 calls of action, just remember that because we're going to bring that back up in a second. The TRC also hosted, I read that out already. In addition, the TRC supported community events designed by individual communities to meet their unique needs. The TRC was also advised by a 10-member Indian Residential School Survivor Committee made up of residential school survivors from across Canada. The TRC supported a memorandum initiative that provided funding for activities that honor and pay tribute in a permanent and lasting manner to former residential school students. The TRC prepared a comprehensive report on the policies and operations of the schools and their lasting impacts. The final report included 10 principles for reconciliation and 94 calls to action that speak to all sectors of Canadian society. Through the TRC, the NCTR was also established as a permanent resource for all Canadians. Throughout its 5-year mandate, the TRC appreciated the patience and understanding of Canadians, particularly the survivors. They recognized that many survivors were elderly and that they needed to move forward as quickly as possible to receive statements from anyone affected by the legacy of residential schools. The TRC included ways of sharing that ensured people could describe their experience in safe, respectful, and culturally appropriate manner. For example, some people shared their experience through one-on-one interviews, some via written statements, and others at public forums. The NCTR is now the safe and secure space for stories collected by the TRC and other Indigenous histories and materials for communities. We continue to invite survivors, their families, and others whose lives have been impacted by residential schools to share your truths and experiences in any forms you wish. All right. Um, so, I mean, you can visit this site yourself. NCTR.ca should get you there, right? And then there's lots of other uh, uh, resource options here that you can check out, right? Um, but we don't have time to go through all of those now. Anyways, okay, so one of these calls for action um, has been addressed by the public school boards in Canada. Oh, sorry, in Ontario. Now, I'm sure it's not just Ontario, but what I do know about is Ontario, right? Um, Probably every province is doing something very similar, right? So, this was written way back, just last year, February the 2nd, 2023. Whoa. Um, TDSB makes Indigenous Authors course mandatory for grade 11 English credit. That's the Toronto District School Board. All right, so um, one thing I want to point out right here, right now, is it's not just the Toronto District School Board. There, almost every school board in the province has made the 4U, no, sorry, 3U, um, let's see the course name again. Uh, there we go. This course right here. Understanding Contemporary First Nations, Métis, and Inuit Voices, NBV3U. Um, so let's read a little bit about this course. English. It's an English course, an English credit, grade 11 compulsory credit. So if you're planning on going to university, you would have to take this um, before the ENG 4U course, right? So grade 11 course, Understanding Contemporary First Nations, Métis, and Inuit Voices is designed to as an alternative. See, it says alternative to grade 11 compulsory courses of the English curriculum. Okay, so that was the option, right? I mean, it was an option before, but most of the school boards decided, well, we're going to make this the compulsory course. For this, you're going to have to take this course if you want to take grade 12 university prep English, right? So it was originally designed as an alternative, but the boards are going a little step further and saying, well, no, it's going to be a compulsory course all across the board. Um, so the English curriculum is based on the belief that language learning is essential to responsible and productive citizenship, and that all students can become successful language learners. The curriculum is designed to provide students with the knowledge and skills that they need to achieve this goal. The program helps students develop a range of essential skills in four interrelated areas of oral communication, reading and literature studies, writing, and media studies, built on a solid foundation of knowledge of the conventions of standard English and incorporating the use of analytical, critical, and metacognitive thinking skills. So, what's different about this course is that the students will be reading a lot of contemporary First Nation, Métis, and Inuit authors, right? And there's lots of good ones out there. And so uh, people, students then, will get to understand the First Nations voice, um, and what are the concerns of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people in our country. The themes, the topics, will all be covering the Indigenous people in our country. And so this is a direct result of the 94, 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation. So the boards are going full steam into this. Now, also, besides this one particular course that I mentioned, there are also college level courses and workplace level courses which are adapting or adopting um, this same framework, understanding contemporary First Nations, Métis, and Inuit voices. So it would be an NBV3C, that would be the college level, or NBE3E, which would be the workplace level, right? But they're all this course basically, they're somewhat different. The U one will be much more challenging than either the 3C, which is for college, or the 3E, which is for workplace, for guys who want to go and girls who want to go out and work, get right into the work environment. Okay, so um, let's read a little bit about this article about the Toronto District School Board. Canada's largest school board will make a course on Indigenous text its compulsory grade 11 English credit in a bid to ensure students graduate with a greater understanding of Indigenous culture and history. Trustees within the Toronto District School Board voted overwhelmingly 18-3 Wednesday to replace its current mandatory grade 11 course with one titled Understanding Contemporary First Nations, Métis, and Inuit Voices. This will give students a sense of Indigenous voices, of Indigenous authors, of the Indigenous experience in Canada, which is part of our responsibility in fulfilling the calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation, but also a great opportunity for students to have the learning that the vast majority of Canadians never had growing up. TDSB Chair Rachel Chernos Lynn said in an interview with CBC Toronto, it's not meant to replace, it's meant to enrich, she added. We need to make sure that our students are graduating having learned about residential schools, having learned about the Indigenous experience, and there is no one Indigenous experience. There are many, and this course will provide students with some of that history. Colleen Russell, sorry, just jumping all over the place on me. There it is. Colleen Russell Rawlins, the board's education director, said in a statement that the course is an exciting opportunity for students and will give them a greater understanding of Indigenous cultures and history than their parents had. Indigenous elders and scholars have reminded us that the truth must come before reconciliation, yet the Toronto District School Board and the Ontario education system have no uh, no mechanism yet to for ensuring that all students learn the truth about Indigenous brilliance, contributions, history, and learn from contemporary Indigenous voices in Canada, Rawlins said. The decision follows recent moves by several other school boards, including those in York and Durham regions, to make the course a compulsory grade 11 English credit. This course is taught in 29 out of 110 secondary schools in Ontario, and it's probably gone up in the last year. So this was a year ago that this was written. A course statement on the website of Lambton Kent District School Board, where it's been mandatory since 2017, lists Richard Wagamese's Indian Horse and Thomas King's Green Grass Running Water as resources. Ontario curriculum materials indicate the course was designed as an alternative to compulsory English ones and shares the same learning areas while exploring a range of Indigenous literary, oral, media, and cultural texts. Okay, now, let's see how much time we got left here, and what else do we have to go through here? Okay. All right. I'm not going to read any more of this right now, okay? So, people just believe it's a really important change. A lot of both Indigenous and non Indigenous people, students, really believe it's important. Okay, so I just kind of summarized the last part of the article. Um, all right, so this is, as we mentioned now, it's part of the TRC 94 calls for action. And, oops, I just got lost there. Okay, so eventually, here, under this little heading of educational institutions on page 11, we will add a lot more depth to this course in the future. Okay? Now, I'd like to go over the key questions on page 12 for you to have something to do over the weekend. uh, all right. So, number one, read and develop a response to the following quotation. Consider identity by choice, identity by law, and nations defining identity. In 2010, Assembly of First Nations National Chief Shawn Atleo said it is fair and just that Indian status will be restored to those who lost it because of the inequality in the Indian Act. But the real problem is the Indian Act itself. The Government of Canada should not be able to decide who is and who is not a First Nation citizen. It is not the right of any nation to identify its citizens, and First Nations are no exception. We're calling on the federal government to work with us on a broader approach that goes beyond these narrow amendments and deals with the real issues of First Nations citizenships. Now, Shawn Atleo he's been outed from the AFN, but he was there for a bit, and I have a video that I want to play for you with him talking about the Indian Act, okay? So, where are we? There we go. Okay, so let's listen to this interview with him, okay? This might help you answer that first question of this key question number 7.
4 years ago, on a spring day in June, Shawn Atleo sat with his grandmother and he watched Prime Minister Stephen Harper apologize to First Nations people for the brutal system of residential schools.
These institutions gave rise to abuse or neglect and were inadequately controlled.
More than 100,000 children passed through those schools, torn away from their families and communities.
We apologize for failing to protect you.
Shawn's grandmother turned to him and said this, "Grandson, they are just beginning to see us." She had raised 17 children. All went to residential schools, but not Shawn. He was the first in his family not to go, and against the odds, he finished high school and then university with a master's in education. Now, when he returned to the Hauset Nation on Vancouver Island, Shawn worked as a community activist and leader. And now as chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Shawn represents more than 700,000 people across Canada. He says education is the key to survival for Native communities. Only 40% of Native children graduate from high school, half the rate of non-Native kids. And there are other serious problems: housing, economic development, and the Indian Act.
It is well past time that we begin to undo the damage that act has inflicted on our peoples and to our partnership.
Shawn says these are just some of the areas that need to be revisited by Canada's federal government and its First Nations people.
And we must not fail.
Please welcome the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Shawn Atleo. Hey, man. So, first of all, thanks for coming back. What did you think when you saw Eighth Fire, the first one?
Absolutely amazing. Throw out mad props to WAB and to everyone who put that together. It was one of the first times I felt like I saw myself reflected back, in the mainstream. Besides George having WAB on, which is really important too, to have this be brought out to the Canadian consciousness. And for me as a First Nations and for all of our people to see ourselves reflected back like that, I have to tell you, I was moved. Very emotional moment, as it feels like perhaps, are we at that tipping point?
It seems like something's different in the conversation these days. Do you feel that way?
It really does. Canadians from all walks of life. When I made a trip to Attawapiskat in December, I was sent with this package, these letters from kids in elementary school from Ottawa. And when I delivered it, it was just one of those moments where it kind of represents that we've come from this deep disconnect. When the Governor General was speaking at our meeting, he helped remind the whole country about the history of First Nations relations with newcomers, and going back to before the Royal Proclamation, talked about Champlain. And of course, this is the 200th anniversary of the War of 1812. A lot of First Nations lives lost, fighting shoulder to shoulder, not as subjects, but as allies. And so there's this hope that we'll return back to that sentiment. But really, it's about relationships between people in the end.
All right, so tell me about this meeting with Stephen Harper, because from what I understand, he was only supposed to show up for the beginning, but he ended up staying all day. How do you feel about it?
Well, in the words of one chief, at the end of the day, there was a lot of skepticism, and because we got deep mistrust that goes a long ways back. A sense of broken promises right from, right after the first treaties were forged. And it's been a litany of that: residential schools, Indian Act. And so it's not easy for First Nations to suggest that maybe this time something is going to be different. And so the Prime Minister, I know, he was scheduled to be off to the Economic Forum in Switzerland. And I, with the encouragement of our people, said, it would be really good to consider, maximizing time. I know that the world of Prime Minister is important. Maybe we have an opportunity here. And one chief said it was respectful, that he took the time to really listen, because that's what learning is all about. It's listening for understanding what each other's perspectives are. That's what the Governor General reminded us was there in the very beginning. Somehow we've strayed, and it's time to return to that sentiment.
Well, how do you get the sense that he's going to, because Paul Martin talked about how the Kelowna Accord was really the step, and when they scrapped it, if they were interested in really building this relationship, that the Kelowna Accord would have stayed, right? And so do you get the sense that there's going to be meaningful change now?
Well, I'm sure hopeful. The last time...
Was that with your heart or your head that you're hopeful, though?
Well, it's both. And that's what we've got to connect. We can think about things from an intellectual perspective, but this has to be about the caring between people and relationships between people, and recognizing that we have grown so far apart. And so coming out of this meeting, so very proud and inspired by our people, the way that we continue to stand firm, that we want to transform education success for our children and do so at the same time in standing firmly in the principle of what we've inherited in our treaty rights, in our inherent rights. Thinking about late George Manuel, who led the charge back in 1969 to reject the White Paper, which was about an attempt to assimilate First Nations into society. This is about respect, mutual recognition, and that's what my late grandmother reminded me as well. Right. They're beginning to see us.
Here's the thing. The Indian Act, there's essentially an industry around this relationship. How do you begin to dismantle something so big a part of the relationship?
It's helpful, first of all, that the Prime Minister, this is one element that occurred, said, you know, the federal government doesn't have a grand scheme to unilaterally get rid of the Indian Act. That was an important message to hear, because those efforts in the past have failed, and we need to return to the original treaty relationship, which is a full partnership. So let's be clear, some First Nations are already out from underneath the Indian Act. They've negotiated modern forms of self-government and treaties, and it no longer applies to them. There has been unilateral attempts to really pull apart the Indian Act on the part of the federal government. And First Nations who have treaties that go a long way back, some as far back as over 260 years, are still seeking a willing Crown partner to implement those treaties. Those are all aspects that were brought, and those issues were shared directly with the Prime Minister, as well as with about a third of his cabinet was there.
And so the process of when you get rid of it, like, what are we talking, 10 years, 15 years? Have you got, they don't have a scheme, but have you guys got a plan?
Absolutely. That was what makes me so very, very proud. First Nations came in, it was so very clear. Going back to the 70s, we have plans for Indian control of Indian education, is what it was called back in the 70s. Right. First Nations control, First Nations education, to see our jurisdiction recognized and supported, and for First Nations to build those systems themselves. You know, in places like the Atlantic, the Mi'kmaq have achieved upwards of an 80% success rate. We can draw inspiration from examples like that, but we need to grow that throughout the entire country, because as Canada, I think, witnessed most recently, and the Eighth Fire provides an excellent overview, particularly so much of it's driven by our artist community and by our storytellers, people like Wob and people like Drew Hayden Taylor, and we've got incredible storytellers and artists. They're really helping to lift the consciousness as well. And so that's the other element of this, is that, you know, we don't rely on a single government or a single prime minister or a national chief or any individual for this work to happen. That we as a country be seized by this and say, you know what, we didn't write that Indian Act, we didn't open those residential schools where my late grandmother and my dad went to, but what we can do is we can share responsibility for getting on with addressing the future, and that is making sure that kids are supported.
The idea, because so much of this, for lots of legitimate reasons, is an emotional relationship and levels of distrust, that there are some who said that that's got to become secondary right now, that the real way to start to fix this relationship is to focus on the non-emotional, economic win-wins, that mutually beneficial business part of the relationship. Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't see that you disconnect these aspects. They're completely and inextricably linked. We have dire conditions and deep poverty. We've got communities in the far north, and yet they may be adjacent to, you know, some of the biggest resource development countries in the projects in this country. And what we need to do is we need to put those elements together. First Nations can and must have a say in designing more sustainable resource development within our country, in our territories. First Nations feel most acutely issues around climate change and problems with the environment. I know that as a story from my own home territory.
But never mind just First Nations responsibilities. Any environmentalist feels in this country like those concerns are back burner to the business gains. So do you actually think that you're going to be able to get Ottawa to pay attention, or these companies to pay attention to that? They won't do it for anybody.
Well, First Nations are getting the attention of companies, not only here but around the world. The passage of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was an important moment, and it was important that Canada endorsed that 2 years ago. Within it, it describes two notions actually, that are really important, that Canada is actually a successor state and inherits an obligation to work with First Nations to implement their treaties. And secondly, that First Nations would have a say in designing their future, whether it's education, health, child welfare, etc. It also says that when it comes to activities on their lands and developments, that they must have free, prior, and informed consent. And so whether we look to advancements in common law in this country, look back to the Royal Proclamation, the treaties, the constitutional talks, this most recent United Nations declaration recognize that Indigenous rights are real, they are legal in nature, and we have to work these issues out. So together we must plan what a sustainable future looks like.
Does it have to become a strictly legal issue for you to get to a place where you're happy with the results?
No, in the end, it's a relationship issue, and it's about people, together working through the development of a shared vision about what our world should look like. I don't have to go so far back as my late grandfather, who he didn't need Al Gore, although it was helpful that he sparked this notion about, for the world, issues of climate change. My late grandfather was telling me about the changes in the environment back home in housing, issues with our fisheries. And then you pile on top of that things like clear-cut logging or fish farming. So many externally imposed dynamic. And today, it's the energy sector. It's major project developments, pipelines, it's oil and gas, it's exploration. And those First Nations that were otherwise so isolated, so remote, guess where they are? They're right where all those resources are. So you better believe that First Nations are going to be key players into the future. So now is the time that we say, you know what, we've been lurching from conflict to conflict. We've got a disconnect between our peoples in this country. Let's seize this moment to do something about it.
So that's one relationship that you have to put together. Now, within your own community, there are lots of disparate voices. Everything from, conversations and emotional to armed insurrection. There's all kinds of ways to approach this. How do you unify that?
Well, I've been out on the roads, if you will. I know. I feel as passionate as all of our people do about the issues that we face and the conditions that we face. The elders, particularly in the lead up to this meeting, they were reminding us about the need to, as Black Elk says, that our sole purpose in the universe is relationality. And the purpose of each human is to create, maintain, and uphold relationships. And this is not an easy task. I'm reminded that there's one of two roads when it comes to this work of reconciling these differences we're talking about. There is the hard road or the harder road. I wish there was an easy road. There is no easy road.
Sad but true.
And the harder road is the one that is full of conflict. And we've had that. We've had Oka, we've had Gustafson, we've had Burnt Church.
But is that necessary to have those? Can you see the value in that?
Well, in other countries around the world, we have the Arab Spring, and we have people's movements, and after all, this has to be about the people and people's relationships with one another and the environment around us. I end up in this sort of work looking to support the addressing the need for better relationships between peoples, and it does require hard work. And the chief said, you know what, Shawn, we need to ensure that the Crown comes and hears what it is we're challenged with. It was important for the Governor General to be there because, as I mentioned earlier, some of these, the treaty relationships predate the establishment of Canada. Canada is formed. We have, the War of 1812. If First Nations weren't there shoulder to shoulder, maybe this country looks a lot different than what we've got now.
It certainly would. Thanks for coming on, man. It's always great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, wow, that's a great interview. He's a very good speaker, Shawn Atleo. Once again, he used to be with the AFN. He was since been voted out. And you know what? I mean, there's lots of people who disagree with him who are with the AFN and the big organizations. But it's interesting to hear his vision. And it blends right into the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Okay, so let's finish off the rest of our key questions now, okay? Okay. All right, so I'm going to go through them quickly because I want to play this little video about Garnet Andrew Knapp as well, in memory of him. Number 2, how can sports and games contribute to your own identity? What sort of benefits do you gain through playing sports and games that help shape who you are and your sense of yourself? Okay, so it could be anything from brute ball to hockey, even making puzzles, crossword puzzle, not crossword, but picture puzzles. how do these things help shape your identity, and how are you benefited from them? Number three, what are the positive contributions of sports to Aboriginal people's sense of identity? Um, and you can probably do internet searches to find out those people who, Aboriginal people, who have excelled in sports. Um, Continue on. Page 13, there's a question here about sports logo. In this exercise, you're making some decisions about various types of sports logos. Begin by assigning a number from the following list to each of the teams in the columns below. All right, so there's a whole list of sports teams. Okay, actually, the Indians doesn't exist anymore. You can almost cross that one out because it's been changed. That was the Cleveland Indians. They're changed to the Cleveland Guardians, I believe, now. Anyway, so you could put an A for animal, P for political, N for natural phenomena, E for economic, and AB for Aboriginal peoples, uh, with the um, right beside each of these different names here. So for the Maple Leafs, let's just use them for an example. Let's see, they're not an animal, they're not political. Uh, I would call them probably a natural phenomenon, a maple leaf, right? Because they're not economic or Aboriginal peoples, right? So that's how you would do that. Answer the following questions. What is the common purpose of team logos? What types of images do the various logos depict? Types can include humorous, powerful, intimidating, ironic, regal, swift, wild, etc. Discuss whether sports logos can be regulated any further than they are, and of course they have. More so. Actually, it's been a natural regulation within the different organizations like the CFL or the N NB National Baseball NBA. Yeah, I got that mixed up. I think it's MBA. I'm not sure. Okay. Right. So, anyways, I wanted to finish off with this short video in remembrance of someone here in Sioux Lookout who was very important in our truth and reconciliation moments, and that's Garnet. Garnet Anjikanab. Where are we? Okay. So there's a number of videos on him there. This is just a short one, um, and in memory of Garnet.
Lifelong advocate for survivors of Indian residential schools has passed away.
Garnet Anjikanab received the Order of Canada for volunteer service to the cause and his efforts.
My volume's not too high.
Former TVT reporter Jordan Mullaney interviewed Anjikanab in Sioux Lookout back in 2013 when that prestigious honor was first announced. Here's a look back at that story.
He now calls the town of Sioux Lookout home and has spent a number of years doing his part to make the community a better place. Garnet Anjikanab was forced from his home in Lac Seul when he was just 7 years old to attend Pelican Lake Indian Residential School, where he spent the next 6 years. He says during his stay there, he, along with many others, were abused physically, emotionally, sexually, and spiritually. Since beginning his healing journey in 1990, he has concentrated on improving the relations between Aboriginals and non-Aboriginals. He says being honored with the Order of Canada wouldn't be possible without the help of a whole community.
It certainly took me off guard, completely surprised, and really honored, deeply honored by the recognition of some of the work that I, along with many others, have done.
While he believes the history of residential schools should be put in the past, he says it should also be acknowledged and discussed to create awareness. Ange Kneb led the charge to have the federal government acknowledge and apologize to the country's residential school survivors. He's also spent the last 20 years addressing the effects and healing for those survivors, and says the only way to move forward is to create a new Canada through reconciliation.
In a sense that you always want to promote understanding, good dialogue, those kinds of good things, so that we shape the future that we want for our children and our grandchildren, so that they live in a good world.
His work in Sioux Lookout includes being elected to municipal council in 1985 and spearheading the Sioux Lookout Anti-Racism Committee, which he says has done a lot of good for the community. He views Sioux Lookout as a great example of a municipality working well with neighboring First Nation communities, and most enjoys giving his people renewed hope for the future.
It's gratifying to see people smile one more time, because we are in many ways resilient, and to know that we can heal and we can reconcile and come back and be good people again, the proud people that we were before we left our communities and our families.
And again, that was a story that we first ran back in 2013. Ange Kneb received his Order of Canada insignia in 2015 from then Lieutenant Governor Elizabeth Dowdeswell. He passed away on July 25th in his hometown of Sioux Lookout. Garnet Ange Kneb was 68 years old.
Hey, check this out. I stopped buying.
That's too loud. Sorry. Okay. Thanks for listening in on that. That was very important for us to honor and respect Garnet and all others like him who volunteered to get the Truth and Reconciliation Committee mobile, and we've now looked at some of the results from it, and there'll probably be more results in the years to come. Anyways, I hope you have a great weekend, everyone, and don't forget complete the key questions I assign, and we'll be back on Monday to start in on lesson number 8. So have a great weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you then. Bye for now.